This week we will be discussing transition periods in a group and focus specifically on norming and storming. Storming and norming, they give us some pretty good clues just in what they are and how they function just by their titles. I think you'll find that much of what we discuss regarding storming and norming will feel very natural to you and familiar. It's information that you will likely be very familiar with. However, we're hoping to expand your understanding of these phases and what they mean for the life of a group and the development of a group, and hopefully you will find some information from this module that will enhance your work as a group leader, as a group counselor. Enhance your understanding, expand your understanding of these phases. In the initial group phases, when the group starts and during the forming phase, people are typically pretty enthusiastic and active. Now, if they it is certainly expected that members will come to a group with some anxieties and some nervousness. We've talked about that. Some groups may be more reluctant to participate. But in many groups, and particularly groups that individuals volunteer for, they self-select, there's enthusiasm, there's some engagement. It's not always enthusiasm as you might see in other areas of your life, but there is some active engagement, some positive expectation in those first couple of meetings that they are there for good work and they're going to be their best self and see the best self in others, and they're more positive, right? But as you shift into your second and third meetings, you may sense a waning of this enthusiasm and a shift. And there's a movement in those first meetings, there's some sharing of history, some kind of focus on history, past history, and then there's a shift in that second or third meeting to really a focus on the here and now, on the present. As we shift to that focus on the present, this is a time of transition for the group. Group members are more aware of each other, they're more aware of position in the group, and a sense of position in the group. We're going to talk a little bit about that more. And they're aware of themselves as individuals associated with the group, connected to the group, and they might be willing at that point to move really past the superficial and into some of the work. However, there's some tension around that. We're going to talk about all these pieces, but there can be some tension around those roles, the expectations, norms, and processes of behavior for the group. And that is characterized as a transition period. This is the time after the forming process, but before the working stage. Transition period typically takes an average of 5 to 20% of a group's time. It's a pretty wide span, but it indicates to you that this is a significant period. It's something that the group leader has to be cognizant of and willing to really focus on and engage in the work that's necessary for the transition period to be effective. It often begins around the second or third session, and it's typically a two-part process. The two parts that we're focused on are storming and norming. Transitions in group counseling overall are typically oriented in one of two ways. They're either focused on like a stage of the group, development, the developmental stage of the group, or they're focused on a theme or issue. And transitions typically follow patterns. And like we've talked about in many other classes, life is structured in patterns, and those patterns matter. Patterns in the process, that's what we want to be attending to as counselors. The transition period begins with storming. And if we're successful in how we work through that storming process, the group moves into norming. Storming, at the most basic level, is a very unsettling time for the group. It involves struggle over power and control. There are overt and covert struggles. Some of these are very visible, and some are less visible. Right? And negative feelings may surface during this time. Anxiety, resistance, defensiveness, conflict, confrontation, transference. It's a difficult time. It is an unsettling time for the group. The norming at that point is shifting into a resolution stage. The focus is really on building cohesiveness, and there's opportunities in norming for the group to move forward together into growth and positive change. During storming, in that tough time, the conflict and anxiety that is in a group, that is the focus. That is what is most prominent. Tension and balance. We are trying to, as group facilitators, recognize the importance for ourselves of focusing on tension and balance. Primary tension, that's early awkwardness that arrives, like that tension that we have initially in a group. Just it's a different situation. It's something we haven't done before, and it's awkward. It's strange. It's a little It's a little difficult to manage. But secondary tension, that's the intragroup conflict. That's related to people's relationships with each other, a sense of connection and disconnect, and that struggle related to all of the relational struggles: power, control, direction. Like who is setting the direction for us as a group? As a group, we'll see that the group itself is struggling to reach a real determination of what's the threshold for tension, what's the working balance. This is a critical component of the stage for us. Excuse me, got an error here. But determining that threshold for tension, and then reaching that balance between too little and too much. Some tension gives us a clear avenue for work in process, right? Like some tension is expected and helpful, and it's just part of the process. Like it's kind of what you expect when you get a group of individuals together, because we have that systemic understanding of a group as each individual brings their own self to this, right? They are individuals. And then as they form a group, they've got other relationships across the group. There's going to be some tension. But the appropriate threshold for tension, what's the right working balance? When do we have too much tension that's keeping our group from progressing forward? That has to be addressed. There are visible and overt ways of expressing frustration, and that the tension might be very obvious. That's what sometimes we see, and when we think about storming, we probably think more of the visible and overt ways. But quiet storming can also occur. And with quiet storming, this can really be focused more on avoidance. Individuals avoiding interactions with each other, avoiding interactions with the full group, not being fully engaged in the group. And that quiet storming has to be addressed as well. If we ignore conflict as group leaders, what we'll see is arrested development for our group. But if we want to be productive, then we shift into conflict resolution and conflict management. Conflict resolution is where we really try to work through conflicts. We want to work through the conflicts and get to a point where it is fully resolved. From your text, you'll see the definition that conflict resolution is based on the underlying notion that conflict is essentially negative and destructive. In this process, the group leader, from this standpoint, I should say, not process, but from this standpoint, the group leader is working to resolve conflict because they feel that it's not that conflict, the resolution of it is more helpful to the group than the management of it. But however, conflict management, that's premised on the basis that conflict can be positive, that you can focus your attention on conflict and the work that you're doing with conflict towards achieving a constructive dialogue. So instead of just resolving the conflict, you're trying to use the conflict as a springboard for movement within the group and growth within the group, some progress down a road. So for most groups, you'll find sometimes that conflict resolution is the right choice, like there's a conflict that needs to be resolved, and other times that conflict, within that conflict, is the opportunity for really clear demonstration of process and utilization of process to move the group towards growth and change. Central characteristics of storming. Storming has these three central characteristics: peer relationships, resistance, and task processing. Within each of these are important elements that, as a group leader, you need to be conscious of and attend to. Within peer relationships, what we think about storming there is the anxiety about interactions with others, okay? So when we think about storming in peer relationships, you know that initially group members are more anxious in their interactions with one another. They don't want to lose control or be misunderstood. All of these examples are in your text. People feel nervous about how it is to interact with each other. And then as a group moves along, some pretty clear power issues often emerge. People have a sense of power being constructed around three areas. Informational power, that's premised on the idea that people who know more are better able to exert control over situations. Influential power is the idea that those who are better able at persuading or manipulating others, they have more control in the situation. And then authoritative power, that's predicated on the social position or responsibility in an organization. So those people, because of their position, hold more power in the group. Within groups, there are power struggles. There are people trying to establish power balances and power hierarchies. And regardless of the type of power being expressed, which of these three types, regardless of that, the principles that you will, as a group member, as a group leader, will use to deal with those power issues will be pretty much the same. Group members, what we see is they try to resolve power issues through ways that they use typically most often outside a group. However, they usually resolve power issues in their lives. Those are going to be the ways, the strategies that they use, that they bring into the group. Right? They're going to bring it right into their work with the group. So whatever they do outside, you're going to see that there. And then their sense of being able to trust the group leader, a group leader can influence power issues and how group members are working to resolve power issues if they have trust, if they have good connections with their group members. And if group members perceive that the leader is someone who can be trusted and who is going to work to resolve anxiety and power issues and to achieve some balance, appropriate balance within the group. If the group leader establishes that sense of self with the group, then group members will trust the group leader and will be able to work through power issues much more effectively. Mistrust in others during the storming phase is often based partly on lacking experience with the group, not being connected to the group, and it's based partly on that sense of how are they going to resolve anxiety and power issues. So those achieving a balance of helping group members feel connected with each other, trusting of you and your approach and process within the group as the leader, achieving that balance will help the group be able to resolve power issues and other issues that may come up within peer relationships. Resistance is another central characteristic of the storming phase. And resistance is best defined as any behavior that moves the group away from areas of discomfort, conflict, or potential growth. During the early part of the storming phases, you typically would see a strong increase in resistance. Resistance is maybe multi-directed and can be aimed at discussion material, or activities or engagement. If you're unprepared for resistance as a group member, your most likely response is going to be defensiveness. So what you want to do as a group leader, now I may have said group member before, I apologize for that inconsistency, but as a group leader, what you want to do is not respond with defensiveness. You want to be prepared for resistance. Expect that you will see some resistance, particularly during the storming phase from group members, and decide how will you deal with these different types of resistance. Resistance is going to either be indirect or direct. Direct is very harmful, can be very, very harmful, but indirect, I see it as pretty corrosive, over time, because indirect is easier for us as group leaders to avoid dealing with, and sometimes we will avoid dealing with it by engaging other members of the group instead of the member who's more resistant, and that can be corrosive to the cohesiveness of the group over time. So you don't want to avoid it. You want to deal with it. You want to determine what is the best way for dealing with these different types of resistance. Indirect resistance, the types of indirect resistance you will likely see will be intellectualization, questioning, advice giving, band-aiding, and dependency. Dependency typically results from band-aiding. You can learn more about all of these types of resistance, indirect, indirect, and all of the individual types. There's more discussion of those throughout your text, and they're very, very helpful. That discussion is helpful. Make sure as you explore the material in your text, you consider, so how will I, as a group leader, during the group experience for the class, and during the group experiences that I lead outside of this in my service as a counselor, how am I going to deal with each area, each type of resistance? What's most comfortable with me, and how can I consider in advance how I might deal with it so that I'm better prepared to do it in the moment? Another characteristic of the storming phase is task processing. Task processing is just the ways of accomplishing specific goals. It's how we work through the goals during our work as a group. What we know about task processing is that you see, we mentioned before, that resistance it increases during the storming phase. Well, task processing during the storming phase, it really decreases. The group has a lessened ability somehow to concentrate directly on objectives. It's really a pause in the group's attention to the objectives. The positive for that is that it allows us to reevaluate our goals and look before we leap. It gives you a moment to say, is this what the group really should be working towards? For the group to say, is this what we are going to be willing to be committed to, these goals, these objectives? But the negatives are that that lack of progress during that time, during that pause, can lead to blame and scapegoating. As a group leader, a group facilitator, you want to be conscious of that and work to move your group through that blame into an area of comfort with the space that it took to deal with the storming process, and help them move effectively through storming. To progress through storming, we've got to be attentive to our group process. You may use a process observer, someone who's independent of the group but trusted by you, and you can introduce in a trusted way to the group to observe processes and give feedback. You may also turn the group's attention to process. Doing this, turning the group's attention to process, can be very, very powerful. Leveling is another strategy for progressing through storming. And with leveling, we're going to work to put all group members on a level and even stage where people can interact freely and evenly, like they're connected together. They're laterally connected. This is a leveled process, and they're able to engage with each other with shared power. Feedback is another way to progress through storming. In this class, with the group experience, you do journaling. Journaling is a formal way of giving feedback. It allows the group members to reflect on the experience. It allows the group leader to be more conscious of what's happening with the group and attend to what's working and what's not working. Informal feedback can be discussions in class. In the group experience, not class. But informal feedback can occur through just quick discussions and feedback in an unstructured way at any time. This allows you to be more sensitive to periods where it's clear group members need voice, and it allows for you to give them space for that voice, to empower them to take the space for that voice. And then formal feedback can include rounds, logs, or journals, as mentioned before. For yourself as a group leader, think about how it is for your members. What are their conflict management styles? Because conflict management isn't something that just the group leader does, that they just step back and manage the conflict. That would be nice because it would be a cleaner process. But the truth is that every individual member of that group is fully engaged in the group, and they're part of the conflict management process. And they bring their own previous experiences and their own understandings of what works for them and how they operate to the group. Understanding conflict management styles can help you encourage your group members to be more effective team members for the group as we work through conflict. Competing, that's one conflict management style. What we know is that, before we move on to each style, let me say a couple of things I wanted to highlight from the text. Is that often group members enter the group with a limited response range. People have limited language for discussion, emotions, feelings. We know that when people come to counseling, they have limited language for that, and they come to groups with limited styles and processes for dealing with conflict. They typically feel most comfortable or even know only one or two of these five dominant conflict management orientations. Helping group members be more aware of conflict management styles and orientations and what those styles mean and how they might utilize them can really expand not only their ability to effectively navigate interpersonal relationships within the group, but can definitely help them navigate those relationships in their external lives as well, their personal lives as well. So competing. This occurs when individuals pursue their own concerns at other people's expense. Right? Accommodating. That happens when individuals neglect their own concerns to satisfy the concerns of others. You see how they stand in direct contrast? With competing, it's I will get what I need to achieve and move through this conflict however I need to do it for me. But accommodating is I will give whatever you need to move through this conflict effectively for yourself. Collaborating, that occurs when individuals work with others to find solutions that fully satisfy the concerns of both. Which one of those seems the easiest? Not collaborating. That's a challenge, right? And that's something that we often have to be taught. It takes intentional focus on this area for ourselves, and how can we become better at collaborating with others when dealing with conflict. Avoiding, that's seen when individuals do not immediately pursue their concerns or those of other people. They really avoid the conflict. And then compromising is when individuals attempt to find an expedient, mutually acceptable solution that partially satisfies both parties. With collaborating, it fully satisfies both parties, right? that piece is the difference with collaborating and compromising. Compromising is we give up some to achieve what's most expedient. But collaborating is we don't give up. We find a way to have the pieces fit so that all parties are fully satisfied. At different times in your life, all styles are necessary, right? And at different times in the trajectory of a group, different styles will show up as being the ones that are most effective to promoting the group. Helping your group members be more aware of these styles and conscious of the styles is important as a group leader. And it's important for you to be aware of those and how you'll facilitate your group members' awareness of those within your group processes. Group types impact the length and depth of storming. With psychoed groups, it's pretty low in interpersonal conflict. If any interpersonal conflict does arise, then what you would expect is that it would be very brief in duration. It's not going to last long. The focus is not on those interactions in the same way. But in psychotherapy groups, the impact of storming, you can expect it to be more intense and last longer. Right? Like it's more impactful in psychotherapy groups than you would see in psychoeducational groups. What do we mean by norms? Like when you're working through storming and you've understood the processes for conflict management, the styles of conflict management, you've helped your group begin to really work through that. As we're emerging from storming, what do we mean by norms? Well, norms are expectations about behavior. Norms regulate the performance of the group like as an organized unit. And group norming is achieving identity, a feeling of we-ness, cohesiveness. When we reach a point where we have some clearly accepted group norms, we've established those group norms, we have that identity as a group and cohesion is emerging, people are more enthusiastic. Cooperation is expressed. And this is part of our process to get to that level of group norms and connection. In norming, some groups you can see that they'll experience it as a distinct phase in their development. It is a clear phase. But for others, this is constantly evolving. And there's no one right way. Different groups will need different things. But there are two components of norming, the peer relations and the task processing. Peer relations are typically manifested through hope, cooperation, collaboration, cohesion, identification, and focus on the present. Peer relations during group norming are reciprocal. I give to you and receive from you. I have a responsibility to you and trust you to accept your responsibilities to me. We're engaged. We have positive attitudes toward other members of the group. In many ways, the norming phase parallels the forming stage, in the focus on positive emotion. But the difference for us, and they have that parallel, but the difference is that during this phase, we really know each other within our group. And the depth of our understanding and connection to each other is much different than in that forming phase when we have initial positive expectations for each other, but we don't really know each other. We don't have that connection. Depth and cohesion during the norming stage, those are critical to establishing a strong foundation for all of our future work. Task processing during this time, and to learn more about all of these components, please be careful and conscious of your reading of the text, right? Task processing during norming may be, we may find it emerging as having prescriptive norms, which really describe the types of behaviors that should be performed. Like, what do we tell and articulate the behaviors that are expected. And then prescriptive describe the types of behaviors that should be avoided. We have a commitment to the group. We evidence commitment to the rules. And there's a commitment as well to individual goals. These are important. These are important components of task processing and how we engage in the task of the group during the norming stage. They set us up for the work of the working stage. How might we promote norming as group leaders? We do that through our support, through our empathy for group members and the connection, and empathy for the process that is so challenging, the storming phase. We have empathy for our group members as they move through that, and we support them and work to further connect them with each other. Through our conscious facilitation, we have clear and direct communication channels among individuals. We work to establish those and facilitate communication through those channels. We are working to be actively engaged in encouraging group members to have voice and share and connect. And we may also promote norming through self-disclosure. One of the strongest signs of trust, straight from your text, in a group is self-disclosure, revealing to group members information about oneself. That self-disclosure is enhanced when members feel safe. We have to work to create an environment that allows and encourages members to self-disclose and to connect with one another. And through that, we can promote norming. If we're effective as group leaders and we help our group to successfully move through the stages of storming and norming, then we're positioning our group for effective transition into working. That's our focus as group leaders. And we have to recognize that we may feel some anxiety ourselves during those, when we hit that second or third session, and things were so positive at the beginning, but then there's this struggle and these like clear jockeying for power and control and position. It can feel a real challenge to us because we were so certain that our group, this group that we connected with initially, was going to work directly towards their objectives. You know, they laid out their goals, things, we were on a good path, and then suddenly we're in this mire, this quagmire, this challenge. As group leaders, we have to be conscious of that being a critical phase for getting us to a depth of connection that will be the foundation for all of our work. The real work is not through shallow connections to easily achieved objectives in psychotherapy groups. In these groups, the real work is through the connection to foster those dynamics that we talked about earlier in the class, so that group members are able to engage in the hard work, the complex work at looking at self-relating to others, and self-relating to larger systems, positioned within larger systems. That complex work requires successfully traversing norming and storming and norming. We gotta have faith in that process ourselves as group leaders. And we've got to be able to immerse ourselves in that process and be with our groups as they shift through that. We've got to shed defensiveness, shed worry about the pause that happens, and embrace the work and the connection that is emerging, the cohesiveness that emerges as a result of these phases. There's more information about all of these phases in your text. It is critically important that you read your chapter, you attend to the reflection questions throughout the chapter, and you be prepared to discuss these components in class as they emerge during our group experiential components of the class. Thank you.